Hi, I'm Scott Wrighton, and it's our pleasure, along with other staff that you don't see on this camera, to bring you these weekly updates about what's going on with your city government, not just here at city offices, but around the city where we provide these services. I want to cover three topics. The first one is that I'm very pleased to announce that after many months of effort, the city and its consultants were successful at landing a $9.88 million grant through the U.S. Department of Agriculture to assist us with a multi-year plan that the city's been working on for a long time to improve the management of our watershed. Now, by watershed, what I mean is the portions of 9 counties or 7 counties and nearly 900 square miles of land from east central Illinois that drains to Lake Decatur. And by managing that watershed better, probably 85% of which is used for agricultural purposes, we can reduce the silt and the erosion runoff that comes into Lake Decatur. And the reason why we want to do that is that not only does it contribute directly to water quality and the quality of the water when the lake is used for recreational purposes, but hopefully will mean that years into the future, the city will not have to replicate the $95 million multi-year project it had to undertake several years ago to dredge the lake after nearly a century of this kind of agricultural runoff coming into Lake Decatur. So what that means is that we're dealing with a large list of partners, of Farm Bureau organizations, of county agricultural extension units, and other groups to work directly with farmers so that they can do different things with their swales, with what crops they plant, with the buffer zones they create, so that the amount of erosion and fertilizer as well runoff is reduced into the receiving streams that eventually go to the Sangamon River and to other streams too that eventually feed into Lake Decatur. In fact, we found as a result of the dredging project a few years ago that cubic yard for cubic yard, there was actually more sediment coming in from places like Big Creek, Finley Creek, Sand Creek, from some of these smaller rivers and streams, rather than the Sangamon River, because it's still suspended. They're such short creeks and streams that it's still suspended by the time it reaches Lake Decatur. And so the catch basins and the screens that are intended to catch the sediment in the lake oftentimes fill up faster in those entry points rather even than the Sangamon River. So these are some of the things that we're learning in our watershed management work. And there's a cost to going out and working with these farmers and asking them to plant something different or to manage their drainage differently. And so this grant will go a long ways towards making those improvements. But still, it's going to take years for us to really make a big difference. The Lake Decatur was created almost a century ago. In fact, it was a dedication ceremony in July of 1923, so this coming summer will be the centennial of Lake Decatur. And it is certainly the mayor and city council's view that we should be and need to be much better stewards of Lake Decatur in its second century, coming up after 2023, than we were in its first century. So you'll be hearing more about that in the months and even the years ahead. As we use this grant and ones that will come after it as well. In fact, we got this grant sort of is a segue into my second topic, and that is that there are a lot of other grants that we haven't had a chance to talk to you about in these videos that the city is pursuing. We share the concern of many Americans that all of the extra deficit spending that the federal government is engaged in with some of these massive spending bills and what impact it's going to have on inflation. We all share that concern with inflation being out of control at the current time, that there's too much deficit spending that is driving that. All of that said, we still want to make sure that the city of Decatur is well positioned to get grant money whenever we can, to get low interest loan money whenever we can. And so, for example, we're pursuing a grant for additional funding for the Brush College project, for several of our transportation projects. We have a planning grant pending. Hopefully we'll get funded for electric vehicle charging stations and to develop a plan for that. There's a fair amount of money available for the construction of solar arrays and other alternative energy projects that would be funded with some of these appropriation bills that have found their way through Congress. And we want to make sure that Decatur is getting as much of those funds as possible so that those costs are reduced here, and so that the construction of these projects is a benefit realized by our citizens, and that any energy savings are ones that we can capitalize on here too. So yes, we're concerned about how all this extra money drives inflation, but at the same time, we're going to make sure that Decatur gets all that we can through those funding sources. The last thing I want to talk about briefly has to do with the general appearance of the city. We continue to make increases in the amount of code enforcement work that we do, and understanding that the cleanup and better maintenance of properties isn't something that the city can do by itself. We need your partnership about being better stewards of the property. And so one small piece of that has to do with a problem that happens from time to time, and that is that there's too many sort of volunteer signages that appear on the public right-of-way. By the public right-of-way, I mean that space between the curb and the sidewalk, or in some cases there isn't a sidewalk, but maybe about where the sidewalk would be. It's not always the same amount of space. Sometimes it's only 10 feet, 5 feet, sometimes 20 or 25 feet back behind the edge of the street that is a part of the right-of-way that's owned by the city or by the state and is public property. In the vast majority of cases, even though the city owns that strip of land, we call it the boulevard or the berm, it's called different things, and we expect the private property owner to mow it and keep it cleaned up for us, and they get to use it even though they don't pay taxes on it. That's sort of the understanding of how urban life works. But it is still owned by the city, and so if there's homemade signs plugging why somebody wants to sell asphalt services or siding services or roofing services or even garage sales and real estate signs. These are signs that were not intended to be on the right-of-way. They were intended to be on the private portion of your front yard back behind the right-of-way line, usually where the sidewalk would have been. And so periodically, and the city has done this for years, periodically we send the Public Works department out to pick up those signs. We don't cite anybody, we don't fine anybody, we just pick up these signs after giving some degree of notice. And it's important that we do that, not only for making the town look better and making sure that our streetscapes look better rather than cluttered, but in some places these signs get put inches behind the curb, and if you're trying to make a right turn and see, or left turn, and trying to make a determination as to how close the traffic is so you can make that turn safely, if there's a sign in the way, then that's an impediment to safety, and it's a traffic hazard. And so we act as uniformly and as generally as we can to take those out and do so in a fair way. But it's really about safety, and it's really about just making those right-of-ways look a little better. So I would ask that you'd help us out. Some of these volunteer signs are not a problem as long as they're set back far enough from the right-of-way. In so many ways, we need your help, whether it's with law enforcement or code enforcement or just keeping the right-of-ways clear. It's a citywide effort. It's not just something that the city government has to do itself. So thank you in advance for your help with that. I look forward to talking to you again next week, and I'll see you then.